Hello, Forrest colleagues, and welcome to the Forrest & Company webinar, Anaklesis, a Deeper Dive. My name is Michael Clark, Director of Sales and Marketing, and I will be your moderator today. With me is Julian Chapman, Forrest's, as you know, EVP Consulting and Business Solutions. Welcome, Julian.
Thanks, Michael. Good afternoon to you all. It's great to be here.
Firstly, for everyone, here's some housekeeping. This webinar will be 45 minutes long, including a few minutes for Q&A. I have muted everybody so that we're not talking on top of each other. We'll do some Q&A at the end of the session, but in the meantime, if you have any questions, type them into the question box that you can see through your GoToWebinar interface on your monitor. If you're experiencing any tech problems, well, you're SOL. Please go to the GoToWebinar links that you've got. Finally, to all registered attendees, I will forward to you a complete notes version of Julian's presentation. This will let you concentrate on listening instead of note-taking, unless that's your thing. So, with great pleasure, Julian, I pass the mic to you.
Thanks, Michael. Well, welcome, everyone. The intent today is to discuss the nature of anaklesis and change. Anaklesis has been part of the Forrest vocabulary since Herb introduced it to us over 10 years ago. And today represents an evolution in our thinking and the combination of anaklesis and change. After all, we at Forrest & Company are in the business of change. Whether it's through coaching, training, facilitation, or consulting, it is all about creating change for individuals, creating leaders of character who achieve extraordinary results. My sense is that we haven't been leveraging discussions of change or anaklesis with our clients nearly as much as we could be, and today is going to represent an integration of requisite organization and effective intelligence. The agenda for today is, first of all, what is anaklesis? I mean, really, what is it? And then anaklesis and change. We're going to talk about opinions and ideas. And then we're going to talk about people. And then finally, the third point that we're going to cover off in totality is the Anaklesis Cure. So the point here is that we're going to look at ways to examine all of anaklesis and change in relation to our clients. Perhaps the cure for a very natural yet debilitating process is what anaklesis is about. So into anaklesis itself. So anaklesis. What you should notice about this definition is the undermining part of it. The fact that it undermines an individual's efforts. So anaklesis is about shaking our foundations, but truly shaking them. And that which we perceive we rely on is the other part of this definition. And I stress we perceive we rely on. Whether we really rely on it or we perceive in our emotional thinking, the effect is the same. We often refer to ideas versus opinions. So you will have seen definitions that have referred to ideas. But here we've been very specific, using our definition of ideas versus opinions in an effective intelligence approach. These are, in fact, committed interpretations versus ideas, which are by definition uncommitted and might be suppositions.
So, Julian, I could say it's something more to do with the blue side of the spectrum than the red side of the spectrum in EI.
Absolutely. It is that commitment, that belief aspect of opinions. So how then does this relate to change? Here I am, minding my own business. There I am, that's me. Along comes a change, the ominous change. If that impact changes my opinions or beliefs or my relationships with people, there's going to be a physiological response. I'm going to respond in some way. And anaklesis drops in to protect me. Anaklesis and change are inextricably linked. So if we find the means to manage change, we find the means to manage anaklesis. These changes can be in our relationships with others or in our relationships to opinions. In one way, you could see anaklesis as a protector because it protects my current state. It protects my stasis, where I am right now. Where it causes us issues is that it also impacts changes imposed in work and our relation to others. So then it can get in the way. So while we may be using the term change, it is important to have a framework, a common framework in which to view it. So what is change itself? Well, in our experience, organizations struggle with creating change. I think everyone out there can attest to this. Whether that's changing behaviors in individuals or changing direction, as in strategy. And people are different and have different attitudes towards change. So what we found is that, as I said at the very beginning, that we in Forrest and Company are about creating change. So getting clear on what change is all about is important to us. So what is change? Well, I'll give you a definition. It is to make or become different. It is rooted in new. So I'm taking it back to the affective intelligence aspect of this, the new aspect about it. After all, if we go back to realizing new, that is the essence of green thinking. We are creating a change for someone. It is rooted in new as opposed to current or past. It is about moving from a current state to a future different state. So change is about bringing in the new. That said, not all new is good. And we'll talk a bit more about that a little later on. There is a relationship of change to another big concept, which ties us back to anaklesis. And this other one is one of the critical strategic aspects, and that is innovation. Innovation as tied to the corporate strategy. Now, I'll give you a definition of innovation that we can play with this afternoon. That is in novus. So in something new, either in the market or in the organization. So novus, the new thing, into the market or into the organization. So then what happens is that in innovation, what we're doing is we are bringing something new in, therefore creating change. Now, if you're paying any attention to the Conference Board of Canada or the former Governor of the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, one of our biggest issues is, as Canadians, is that we lack innovation. That's the argument that's put out there. By the same token, we have a nation that may be struggling with bringing in new things, yet all of our clients are using innovation as a value. So we have this tension that's created there. So getting good at dealing with innovation, dealing with change, dealing with overcoming anaklesis is important to our business. So the relationship of innovation and change is about bringing something new in. The in to the market or the organization of the new. In 2009, Statistics Canada stated that an overwhelming obstacle to innovation is uncertainty and fear. Yet, by the same token, change is natural and happens all the time. So why do we resist change? We as human beings need a sense of control. This relates to that foundation in anaklesis. Stasis is control. We as human beings, struggle to define our relationship to life. That which we are in full control of, that which we are in partial control of, and that which we have no control of. So as you can see in this diagram, they're related as spheres. And these spheres vary based on each of us. I may see that I have little control and acquiesce control to others, or the fates, as often is the case. Or I may, on the other hand, feel the need to be in ultimate control and strive to control my environment and others. So it's important when we're coaching, in particular, to help our coaching clients understand the nature of their relationship to control. All of us struggle from time to time where we have full control. We struggle with partial control, or we struggle with ultimately having no control whatsoever. Identifying where you are is part of understanding your reaction to change. So when change happens to me and I have no control over it, is a lot more disconcerting to me than where I have full control.
And if I could say the other way around too, if you had full control, well, that's interesting. If you had full control and change came down, it's not going to, you know, who cares? I'm just going to walk into it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So resistance to change is not just about being in control, but it is a critical part of this. The two concepts of the foundation in anaklesis and control are interrelated, though. It should be noted that these are not the sole sources of rejection of change. And it is often misconstrued that if I reject change, it is only because it is out of my control. That isn't necessarily the case either. So it is not just control. It is actually a bit more complex than that. And so now it's time to examine another facet of this. Enter the relationship to affective intelligence. The framework that I'm about to talk through is critical to understanding what Phillips and the DIVA project intended to do 30 years ago. As Phillips tried to solve why they could not be more innovative, they noticed a dynamic that was occurring. Their issue with innovation had nothing to do with originality or ideation, as Jerry Rhodes likes to refer to it, and with nothing to do with getting something accepted in the marketplace. Their issue with innovation was an issue internally inside the organizations.
Or an attitude, well, an attitude and process, I'm trying to think.
Absolutely. From the standpoint that their issue was not that the market didn't necessarily accept the things that they were putting out. They couldn't get the good ideas, the ideation things, out to the market because they got stalled inside the organization.
Okay.
This is actually one of the important points that we need to be bringing to both the Conference Board of Canada, StatsCan, all of those people that keep talking about innovation, because it is an internal issue. It isn't that we can't get the market to accept. It's not an issue of ideation. If you look at the innovations or the ideas that Canadians have created in this country,
we have the capacity to do it, don't we?
Absolutely.
So what I'm imagining, what I'm seeing there is at the beginning of the process is ideation. At the end of the process is bringing it to the market. So bringing it to the market is doable. It's just a matter of research. Ideation is doable. You just have the right people. So the problem is happening in between.
Exactly. So a new idea created or developed is tested and then pushed out of its incubator. The big issue is that it is unfamiliar to all the others. After all, it was probably developed in another department. If any of you are working with clients right now who have to implement a new system, a new approach, a new process, a new policy, a new technology, this is what they will end up struggling with if they're not already struggling with it, because it is unfamiliar. And so it runs into judgment from others.
Dun, 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 dun.
Very few new ideas get accepted outright, which becomes an acceptance wall, a boundary, I would argue, the foundation of anaklesis. For Phillips, the issue was how to make it familiar. And so data, communication, a way to describe the new thing, where the new thing came from, the value of the new thing, all of those aspects of selling the idea became important.
I'm thinking about the hard and soft side of that. It's not just information, it's how it's presented, it's how it's coded.
Absolutely. Many times, as we implement requisite principles, we struggle with this very same issue. So to the point that Michael has raised, if we don't do the soft stuff and we only do the hard stuff, the organization will reject it. We have to create it in a way that makes it familiar. So sometimes you can't use the word subordinate.
Right, yes.
You can only use the word direct report because it's subordinate is unfamiliar. In fact, it's shocking for some people. So you have to use that connector that brings the new construct that requisite is to the old organization. In all cases, this is the issue with innovation. Getting novus in. Whether in the market itself or in the organization. So the same thing works outside in the marketplace as does inside the organization.
Interesting. Yes, I could see that. That if you're introducing a new product to the marketplace, you have to go through the same process.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so the realm of marketing is to make it familiar to the marketplace.
Here's Michael just thinking about whether he's doing a good job marketing or not. Okay.
So hence marketing or socializing. Right now, organizations talk about socializing your idea. That is fundamentally making it familiar to other people. But we need to be clear that this reaction comes in many different forms. So the reaction, the unfamiliarity, comes in many different forms. Now, this is what you hear as the wall is built, regardless of the individual. Resistance comes from all angles of thinking. It isn't just a blue thing. But it becomes a blue thing when I solidify, and that becomes my opinion.
Right.
If I welcome the insight, then I'm over in green, but I will still have questions. The thunk challenge is at the core to questioning the new thing that's coming along.
Good point. Yes.
Yet at the same time, it works to unleash new things. So it's got a double-edged sword there. So as I said, resistance comes from all angles of thinking. Underneath each of these, however, deep-seated is anaklesis. These are the manifestations. These become the manifestations. What happens when faced with going against current practices? What happens when it goes against my beliefs? All of these things form the foundation. What happens when I burn a lot of energy to retain stasis? I become unwell over time. And so now here is another facet of this whole discussion of Anaklesis change, innovation, is the relationship to stress. Because what happens is, in the face of these things coming at me, I burn energy to try to deal with them. Ultimately, I become unwell. So this is back to my physiological response to the change. And so when people talk about organizations being change weary, that is an interesting turn of phrase.
They literally are.
They literally are, exactly. The analogy that I like to use is that I may get energy from, because I really like the change that's occurring, but I still burn energy in order to deal with it. So I can still go into burnout, even though it's a great change for me, because I'm burning a lot of energy trying to deal with it, trying to take it on.
It's like the bad side of exciting. You're just you're running around, you're running in circles, you're getting hyperventilated. Take it to the extreme, but yeah, okay, all right.
And so for the stress experts out there, what I'm describing is I'm describing eustress as opposed to distress. So good stress versus bad stress. They are both stress, although what we tend to do in North American parlance is we refer to stress in a negative sense. There are good stresses.
Right.
When I'm trying to get across the street and a car honks at me, that's actually a eustress for me because that wakens me up and I go the extra bound. But if I'm trying to cross the 401 and all the cars are honking at me and I'm burning all that energy to get across the 401, eventually I've run out of energy and, well, we'll leave it as read as to what happens. So I wanted to introduce this notion of stress in relation to change, in relation to Anaklesis, to give you things to think about when you're talking to your coaching clients.
One of the things I'm interested in when I look at this mind frame, Julian, the 6-month mind frame, flip it around and go the other side of it, right? Instead of value, I hate it. The value is I love it. So all of these things have their complete opposites in the adoption of change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we need to be able to explore this reality with our clients. It may be lack of control and anaklesis, or it can be other reasons. So let's dive a little deeper into where this anaklesis comes from in our thinking. By definition, anaklesis is a fear that occurs when we perceive something as undermining and damaging our foundation. If I don't fear it, it's not anaklesis. If I'm okay with it, it's not anaklesis.
Okay.
And this part of it that is important to bear in mind is the perception that it's undermining or damaging my foundation. So the analogy I like to use, if anybody ever wants to use this, the nature of anaklesis is the classic case of when I believed that the world was flat and some guy comes along and says, no, it's round. And just look what happened to him. So it's important. How many of you out there, maybe we can take this as a poll, Michael.
All right.
How many of you out there are actually talking about anaklesis from the standpoint of undermining of foundations or beliefs as opposed to relationships with others? We're going to talk about relationships with others a little later on, but I'd just be intrigued to know how many of you are actually looking at it through that lens of.
Great, Julian, I think I got it up there, right? So everybody can take a moment to fill that in. And the results are coming in, and the results are coming in. And it's 100% yes, Julian. 100%.
Okay, good,
Yeah,
good. So then this part may be a bit of a review for you, but I want to talk about the cognitive and affective tension. In the realm of cognitive, head, and affective, heart, anaklesis rests in and resides in the affective realm. It produces an emotional response and grows in the emotional realm. It is therefore important to bear in mind the interrelationship of the two. As Kim loves to refer to it, the weave.
Right.
They both exist. The cognitive feeds the affective, and the affective feeds the cognitive. It's sort of vice versa. It is that weave. It's important to understand the interrelationship of the affective and the cognitive, because if you want to overcome the affective, you need to overcome it by feeding it through the cognitive realm. So taking it out of the emotional realm and into the head realm.
Heart to head.
Before we leave this framework, though, it's important to take a moment to revisit the old view of anaklesis. And I say the old view because it really was how we defined anaklesis back in the day. Certainly in our initial discussions, this was what anaklesis, the other face of it, was for most of us. Now, it's great that 100% of us are saying that we're talking about it in terms of foundation, but this is often, and this is what our clients remember the most about anaklesis, is the people side. So it's our reliance on our relationships. It's about retaining those relationships in stasis. It's about don't rock the boat. So for example, direct reports are unwilling to tell the boss, boss, you have no clothes.
Right.
In other words, the emperor has no clothes. And by the same token, managers are unwilling to have conversations with direct reports about what they perceive to be the issues, because maybe they're going to quit and leave the company 30 years later, or just not come into work tomorrow.
Or be huffy.
Or be huffy, or slash my tires in the parking lot, whatever the case may be. The point about this side of anaklesis is it is related directly to speaking truth to power. And when we are unwilling to speak truth to power, that's seen as groupthink. Anybody wants a great article on groupthink? Jerry Harvey, who actually was critical in identifying anaklesis, wrote a great article on the fact that there is no such thing as groupthink. It is us unwilling to overcome our anaklesis. It is not groupthink. And I'll leave that to you. And that'll be another webinar maybe at some point. So we have to ask ourselves then, if it is about speaking truth to power, what is this impact of anaklesis on my personal integrity? When you combine this definition of anaklesis around people and that around opinions, it can create huge dysfunction in organizations. And for example, I resist the change because of my discomfort with the change. It hasn't been made familiar to me, whatever the case may be. And I can't or won't articulate it. I've used recently the example of General Motors, because of course they're all over the news, where people knew about the dangers of the ignition system, but nobody talked about it. Nobody put it out there and just kept it hidden. That's part of the anaklesis. I know it's wrong, but I can't deal with it. So with this framework that I've talked about around all of the various pieces, it's time to start considering the cure. But before I leave that, I want to leave you with the quote that's up there, because this was given to me by one of the few Aboriginal store managers of the Northwest Company. And when we were trying to articulate what anaklesis meant, this was his definition: dancing around the fire, trying not to be burned by the embers. Cool. Of course, we've taken it beyond that and referred to it as rotting, stinking loose heads and things like that. But I think this is a good definition. So the Anaklesis Cure. At the core, the cure is to move into the cognitive realm to make whatever is going on visible. It's time to take it out of the emotional affective realm into a place where I can apply logic, analysis, and ingenuity. I need to be able to take it out of the heart into the head to deconstruct it. This is where the coach/facilitator really helps to unlock others. We as human beings don't naturally go there. Instead, we, as I like to refer to it, awfulize and catastrophize. In other words, we let it sit inside our soul without taking it into the realm of where the cognitive can deal with it. But cognitive thinking alone does not cure it. It requires the two sides, both related, but neither of which can occur without cognitive thought. And these are courage and discipline. Courage remains in the affective realm, but needs cognition to help it grow. In other words, I need to know that it's time for me to step up to the plate and deal with it.
Or even understanding, getting much clearer head-based vision on what the problem is, that you've got that hard red or hard thinking, which can provide the soft, which actually fuels the soft side of courage. Cool.
Discipline is that one thing that we all need. Of course, we live in a society that is ill-disciplined, hence why we need the pill for weight loss rather than avoiding a piece of chocolate cake. Now, for those who have a strong sense of soft red, what I'm about to say may be a shock to you, but managers exist to provide discipline. Not the whip, but to get us to do things that otherwise we wouldn't do. That is fundamental to the role of a manager. Discipline and courage are two sides of the same coin. They coexist and can only exist with each other. You can't have one without the other. As a manager, coach/facilitator, you can help to provide the discipline, but it is their discipline which actually wins the day. It's their courage to face it. And this ties in, I think, quite nicely, Tim, to all your work around courage and clarity. This is where you help by providing them with a framework. You help them with their thinking. So, overcoming anaklesis, thought and action. This should be familiar to you all. This is how you help others to act differently in the face of anaklesis, by focusing on the invisible world and not judging based only on the visible world. After all, thinking drives thoughts, which in turn drive actions, which in turn drive results. When overcoming a fear, it is important to overcome reflexive thinking and focus on determinant thinking. An example of this is how police train to deal with a gun call. They train their members to breathe. In other words, what I'm doing is I'm taking it out of the affective realm into the cognitive realm. So whenever you're faced with a situation where your emotion is overcoming you, focus on your breathing. So if you're going to see Old Yeller tonight, focus on your breathing
so that you don't start crying.
So your role is to provide the cognitive framework for others in order to help them to overcome their anaklesis.
It's interesting. I was thinking there's a crossover here into what I think is called CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, where you actually can get a chance to write down why you're reacting to things. In other words, creating the red around your soft reaction. Okay.
Cool. So now we're going to examine the steps to the cure. As with all things in life, there are 3 steps. The first step is understanding the context. Help them to understand the context. Context is the fabric that helps them to solidify determination and is at the core of courage. Understanding impact will help them to understand the impact of changing or not changing their current direction. This will help courage and discipline. And then finally, determined action is the close to courage and discipline itself, getting them to act. Now let's look at these in detail. The questions that I'm going to give you are all leading questions and are all based on the research of Jerry Rhodes and Phillips. Why is it important? Well, if you ask the question to someone, why is it important? It sets a goal and brings it into the cognitive realm. Why is it important for me to overcome my fear? Ask them that question, will launch their thinking. What are the broader implications? Well, what you're doing with this is you're doing a look in, look out with them. You're taking them from where they are right now to see the broader implications if they don't act, if they don't deal with this. And then if you ask them the question, why can't I take this challenge head on? The answer begins to feed the courage. Because when they ask themselves that, so what's really getting in the way? You're now taking it out of the affective realm into the cognitive realm and helping them to take it on, so to speak. Impact makes us look at the damage that I may or may not be creating by autonomously being anaclitic. So the leading questions are these. What do I notice? What do I notice about how this makes me feel? Well, noticing is a sensing process. What is it doing to them? Getting them to understand it. This is actually important for later situations where they're faced with anaklesis again, because now they've got a way to actually sense this is what it does to me. So maybe next time I'm going to be less likely to be anaclitic. The one that I think is probably the most important is at the core of risk assessment. And that is, what is the worst thing that could happen if I don't deal with this now? Both of these questions, the second and the third, are the same question fundamentally. But it's important for people to understand that they need to think this way, because without these, they will awfulize and catastrophize. You need to get them into that. Because now what you're doing is you're taking it out of the realm of the emotional and you're bringing it into the cognitive. What is the worst thing that can happen if I don't deal with it? And what's the worst thing that can happen if I accept it and deal with it now? Presumably, the second question there will be a greater impact than the third question. In other words, it's important for me to deal with this. And so it's not going to have a negative impact on me if I actually deal with it. If it is a case where it is going to have more of an impact on them, and it's not a case of them just not being able to see that, then maybe they shouldn't be dealing with it. Maybe they should remain in anaklesis. And that's worth an argument maybe later on if anybody wants to take it up, because maybe I shouldn't be dealing with it, and maybe it is just going to create too much havoc.
But nonetheless, you've taken it from the affective into the cognitive,
exactly.
So the decision is actually made rationally.
Yeah. As an aside, these two questions are important steps in the stress management, because either question helps me to cognitively assess the impact of the anaklesis, and it helps me to deal with the stressors. The very first question there is actually also an element of stress management, because if I'm actually got a sore back, it's probably because of stress. I am unwell. So there is a direct interrelationship of mind and body in this particular exercise. Finally, determined action is courage and discipline wrapped together. Your leading questions for these are here. Time to ask again, why can't I get on with this? What's in my way? You're getting them to interpret, which is core to self-awareness. That's what they have to do. How far can I really go to overcome my fear? Well, this reflects the riskiness. Many people are concerned that if I do that, I will go too far, particularly when I'm dealing with relationships with other people. Somehow, as a manager, having a tough conversation with my direct report about their behavior, I will go over to an extreme. You need to get them out of the affective realm with that and really thinking about it. Are you really going to go there? And you need to sort of tamp down their fears there, because no one ever swings over into an extreme if they are aware that it may be an extreme.
Great, okay.
How can I control my fears and instincts? Works to suppress the affective thinking again. So how am I going to deal with it? What are some methods that I'm going to use to deal with that? And then last but not least, how soon can I commit? Committing determines action. It reinforces courage and starts the discipline. It is all about commitment. It's back to the chocolate cake. It's about committing to not eating the chocolate cake.
It's about committing to not committing.
All of these are your tools. So in summary, what we talked about is, what is anaklesis? Anaklesis and change in relation to opinions and ideas, people, and then the Anaklesis Cure.
And thank you very much, Julian, and thank you to all of our attendees. But before we go, just do we have any questions out on the floor? You can look at your questions interface in the GoTo software, and does anybody have any questions they want to drop in on us? While I'm waiting to see if that comes in, Julian, just I'm wondering, do you know if there's been any research done that actually that shows that relationship between the mind and the body? Because clearly what we're talking about here is there is some sort of a feedback mechanism that drives anaklesis, or starts with anaklesis, goes into the mind, comes back down. I'm just wondering if, or even in your experience of the stuff that that some of our people have talked about in anaklesis, is there a discussion about physiology?
That's a great question. I think, I mean, René Descartes would probably be the first guy, okay, although he was a philosopher, not necessarily a research scientist.
Back in the day, same.
But there's a myriad. I don't know that I can point to any specifics, but there is certainly the relationship of mind-body and the interrelationship. That's why Phillips, although they talked about the work of affective intelligence being in the cognitive realm, it actually spills over into the affective realm.
Both sides, yes. Okay.
In the emotion side.
And actually, I've got a question here from Tim. Thanks, Tim. Can you give us a story about someone who overcame anaklesis?
That's a great question, Tim. That's a great question. I can think of any number of cases where, particularly CEOs, so at the big level is the CEO who brings in a change when the rest of the organization is unwilling to go forward with it. I think that's probably the best examples of that. I wish I could think of one specific CEO that we would use. Nick would immediately go to his dear friend.
What about, let's say, the CEO of we're on Bunk's family here, Edward at Northwest Company.
Yeah, it's certainly Edward. I mean, where I was going was Jos Winterman, who, against all odds, pushed requisite into Canadian Tire Financial Services, and then into Life Labs. So cases where they've done that. Edward Kennedy has done the same at Northwest, where you have the organization in stasis, and so they come in to bring a big change about. I would suggest that there is an element of any individual who overcomes their fear of changing is overcoming anaklesis.
Right.
So we often use the example in the leadership path, Tony's example of the individual, and I can't remember how many pounds he lost as a result of going through the leadership path program. Not in the program itself, but his desire to create change for himself. But those would be examples of people overcoming anaklesis. So, and it requires courage and discipline.
Right, courage and discipline. Maybe that's going to be the next webinar, everybody. Well, we're running down to time, and we want to keep this on track. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening in. We appreciate it. This is our first internal delivery, our first successful internal delivery with the webinar system. Please let me know. Send me a note if you have any comments or suggestions. But other than that, I bid you all a very fond afternoon, and take care.